Welcome back, everyone, to a brand new episode of the Crypto and Muay Thai podcast. I'm your host, Chris Brookins. I'm super excited to welcome our special guest today, Coleman Maher. He is the head of business development at OGN Protocol. Coleman, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
It is my pleasure. It is my pleasure to have you. So for those who may not know, why don't you just start off by giving just a quick background of yourself and a natural sort of like segue into how you found yourself in this wild world of digital assets.
Sure. I guess quick background. I studied math in university. I was always into online communities. So I think back in 2014 on Reddit, like Dogecoin was a big thing. Like people would tip each other and, make memes and stuff like that. And it wasn't something I took super seriously, but that was kind of my introduction into cryptocurrencies. Fast forward a few years later, like 2016, 2017, I noticed that things were picking up a little bit of steam. Like, there's some real serious money like being injected into the ecosystem. So, I mean, of course, that's usually what makes people notice, like when there's like a little bit of a bull market or whatever. So I started becoming much more active around 2016, 2017, trading, going to meetups, stuff like that.
Got you. So 2016, 17, you're going to meetups. What at that particular point, did you have a general like feel or flavor? You're like, okay, I want to get involved in this space, but I don't know in which particular capacity. So, myself, I don't have a technical background. Daniel Kim, head of revenue from SoFox, doesn't have a technical background, but still figured out a way to participate in this like growing space. So at that time, we were like, all right, I see this is picking up steam, probably even investing a little bit. Did you have a general idea? You're like, I want to get involved in this particular area? Or at that point, was it just still so new and exciting that you're just trying to get exposure in any way possible?
I think it was a couple things. Like, I was, a true believer in cryptocurrencies, and, I believe in the mission, like why, they came into existence. So it was a personal interest to me, just like intellectual academic interest. Also, I was investing and trading, so there was a financial interest. I did, I have a little bit of development skill, and I did study math, but I wouldn't, I didn't go at it as a technical person or a developer, really. I was more just trying to learn as much as I can, trading some, Bitcoin or shitcoins or whatever you call them. And then when the ICO craze started, like that was interesting as well. There's so many new projects with grand promises, and you're talking about how they're going to change the world. It was just a really exciting. For context, I'm from San Francisco, and I was living in San Francisco during this time, so that was kind of like the mecca of cryptocurrency hype or whatever and activity in the United States. So like the meetups went from like once a week or 2 times a week and pretty small to like gigantic events where there's like 200 people like waiting to get in and full capacity, standing room only, and they were happening like every day. So it was a real exciting thing to be a part of. And I was, when there's that much excitement, when it's a huge bull market and things are really frothy, like you're just looking for different opportunities, like, how you can possibly benefit or learn. So it was a pretty general like thing for me. Like I was just interested in it generally. I wasn't going into it trying to, get a job or anything like that. It was kind of like an accident.
Got you. Yeah, I mean, talking about that, it's like where there's smoke, there's usually fire. And just sort of like hearing your experience of seeing just the local meetups grow and then eventually the interest. And then obviously over the most recent years, we're just seeing not just a bunch of, capital from institutions sort of flood in, not just from a venture capital side, but gradually from more and more of a traditional allocator perspective, but also like a brain drain as well, pulling in from more and more sectors just because it's getting more and more popular. So that must have been a very, very exciting time. And I can kind of like see it. I've spent some time, I've lived out in San Francisco. So like I'm seeing sort of like a little bit of that experience in my mind too.
Yeah, I mean, San Francisco's already where, the smartest people in America go to disrupt things and build companies. So it was like really good, I guess you could call it like social proof that a lot of really, really smart people, like from engineers to technologists, venture capitalists, were going to these meetups and we're talking about these big ideas. So um, it gave it a lot of credibility and everyone was excited.
Got you, got you. That makes total sense. So how did you end up finding your way to Origin? So at this point in the story, you're a true believer. I'm I'd be curious to know like why you sort of like truly believe in the value proposition. I do as well. But each and every single person kind of like has their different angle that they kind of come from it, and might be interesting for the reader or for the listeners to sort of hear about that. But also at this point, like you're just excited, you're believing in the mission, you're trading. So how did you eventually sort of get linked up at Origin Protocol?
It's funny. And it goes back to San Francisco being such a tech town. Um, I got interested in cryptocurrency. I started posting about it on like social media or whatever, and then I started to find out like a lot of my friends were also beginning to dip their toes. So it was a lot of people I already knew um, getting involved in crypto, and one of those people happened to be Matthew Liu, who was one of the co-founders of Origin Protocol. He was a friend for a few years, and I saw that he was doing an ICO, like his own project. So I started to read about it, and I told him, hey, I'm super active in meetups. Like, I'm trying to network all the time um, in this industry. Like, anything I could do to help out would be great. And I saw that there was a job posting for a business development role, like a junior business development role. So, I I was an investor like in Origin, and I had a vested interest in um, wanting to see it succeed. It was my friend's project, so I kind of just threw my hat in the ring, and they gave me like a short trial period, and things went well. So I got picked up full time.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a biz dev guy myself. So whenever I was out in San Francisco, I was with an analytics startup within the water space, but like handling biz dev there, and so I completely like see like that mentality of you like being able to use that particular background to gradually work your way into not just this space more full time than obviously believing in, but also a project that you've got a vested interest as well. So super smart, but obviously like that already because it's worked out quite well for you. For
Yeah,
Go ahead.
and sorry to interrupt, but
No, no,
honestly,
no.
like the big thing was it's just like hustle and passion. Like if you're really passionate about the industry and you're willing to put in work, like I don't think I didn't have I didn't work at any tech companies before Origin Protocol, so I didn't have like a typical startup background. I did, go to a good school and studied math or whatever, but I don't think that was relevant at all in me getting hired. I think it was just I was passionate about the industry, and I, worked really hard during the trial period. I think that was one of the other things that was so exciting about crypto. Like you had these like 19-year-olds sometimes like you know becoming the leaders of huge projects. I mean, Vitalik and Ethereum. Um, people people in the crypto industry were less dependent on these kind of like social cues and like branding things like, oh, did you go to Stanford? You know, you know, did you come from like a hot startup or whatever? It was more like a Wild West and like a marketplace of ideas kind of thing. So that was really appealing to me as well, coming from not the most traditional tech background.
Got you. I mean, you took the word straight from my mouth, hustle. Like that's what I was thinking in my mind. And you said it 100%. I mean, as a biz dev guy or sales guy, it comes down to hustle, and you get that additional edge whenever there's passion tied to it. Do you feel like the space is still kind of like that, where it's not as beholden to sort of like the old way of thinking, like you were talking about? It's like, all right, well, what sort of hot startup did you dump out of? Did you have an exit? Are you from Stanford? Are you from MIT or anything like that? Do you still feel like the space is a bit more inclusive in that way, or is it gradually kind of like getting swept up under the standard San Francisco, or I guess I should say, tech startup mentality?
I think it goes in cycles. Like definitely in the early days, up until like maybe 2014, 2015, like most people involved in Bitcoin and crypto were like either anarchists or like hardcore like Austrian economics people or libertarians.
Hmm.
A lot of the Occupy Wall Street people got interested. So I think it was much more. It starts much more fringe, these cycles, and much more about ideology. And in that kind of environment, like it attracts, you know, non people from non-standard backgrounds. So those people do really, really well. But then once the bubble starts forming, I think, you know, venture capital starts to take notice. I mean, to be fair, there was like some prominent venture capitalists were early to the cryptocurrency space, but I think most of the VC herd joined once it was apparent that there was like this huge bubble and like everyone else was talking about it. So I think they're usually kind of latecomers to the party in crypto, and you saw that in like 2016, 2017, venture capitalists were joining the space like more and more, and they joined like really, really big in 2018, and then it kind of crashed. So they were kind of late to the party, and I feel like things reverted back to the way they were before. And you're seeing this now with DeFi. Like DeFi is the hot new trend. It's kicking off a new cryptocurrency bubble, and like half the thought leaders or whatever on Twitter for DeFi are like anonymous cartoon avatar or anime avatar people posting like memes and, you know, using coarse language and all this stuff. So you're seeing like this cycle repeat itself where it's kind of like these, you know, fringe people, weird people, like anonymous developers, ideologues, you know, doing like, you know, doing something like a fair launch of a coin where they don't keep any of it for themselves. There's no investors and they just release into the wild. You're seeing that now in DeFi, and then now you're seeing venture capital, different funds starting to take notice and getting really excited about it. So I think we're at the beginning of another one of these cycles where it goes from kind of like the true believers, and then the, you know, the institutions or professional people come in a little bit later.
Yeah, venture capitalists, I mean, they're not stupid. So whenever they see a lot of money to be made, they're going to start coming in whatever particular capacity. So just like you said, it kind of starts with the true believers, and then eventually it'll matriculate over into the people that have less of a vested interest and more just there to make a buck because they see all the money that's being made. I mean, at the end of the day, that is their job. So they're not stupid, and they typically do it very well, at least the ones that are at the highest level. You mentioned,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to follow. Like, I don't want to badmouth like venture capitalists and say that they come in super late and they're just trying to make money. I think part of that is, you know, the criteria or restrictions of doing their job. Like they can't, you know, a lot of them could not invest in some anonymously founded like fair launch cryptocurrency. Like it's difficult for them to invest in like the early stages of the bubble because things are so fringe and weird that it's kind of like a constraint that they're working with, that they have to come in a little bit later. Like their LPs are going to be like, what are you doing if you know,
Yeah.
if you're investing in some random thing? So I think it's natural. It's not really, you know, I think some of it has to do with ideology and, you know, values, but some of it has to do with just the nature of, you know, venture capital. Like you just can't invest in anything like Wild West.
No, 100%. I mean, I'm not a venture capitalist, so I mean, you could bash them all day long. I really don't give that much of a
I
shit.
have a lot of friends who are VCs. I don't want to say like they're always late to the party.
They're always late to the party. They're vultures, you know, just classic parasitic type investors. No, I obviously VCs, you know, sort of serve a purpose within the ecosystem, but I think you hit the nail on the head. It's just constraints at the end of the day. And you saw kind of like that switch up with Andreessen where they adjusted the structure to be able to take more of an aggressive stance or play more aggressively within the digital asset space. And it was because of those sort of like legacy constraints that you were talking about from a venture capital perspective. And, you know, you're even seeing that still from more of a traditional allocator perspective, even whenever you're just talking about Bitcoin. That's why Grayscale has been blowing up, because they're able to package something in a way that is within the specific set of parameters that either high net worth individuals or institutional capital allocators, quote unquote, can actually throw money behind and not have to worry about custody and, and all this other stuff that they need to eventually check these boxes in. You mentioned DeFi, and I think I'd be remiss if we just didn't talk about that for a brief moment before we discuss Origin. How do you feel about DeFi? I completely agree with you that it is 100% the hottest topic in this market right now, and it's obviously driving. I think Bitcoin gives the blessing in everything that happens in terms of price appreciation in this market still to this day. So the fact that Bitcoin is still going up and is in a bull market right now is given the blessing to the rest of the market. But in terms of price appreciation and hype and exuberance and bringing in more and more brain talent, DeFi squarely leads. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think DeFi is great. It reminds me of the ICO bubble, except at this time it's based off of, like, you have to have a real product, like a real working product in DeFi to get noticed. A lot of the projects that had their tokens like explode in price action have been around for a few years, like Compound or Uniswap. So it's a much better version of a bubble than the 2017 2018 ICO bubble was, because that was most of that was just vaporware. A lot of projects just had a white paper, and you see some of them have not even released anything since, even though they did like monster fundraisers. So I think DeFi embodies a lot more of the real promise of cryptocurrency. Like, a lot of these projects are either self-funded or had a small fundraise. They've been working on their product for many years, and now they're only starting to release tokens, and these tokens actually serve a purpose. Like, people are excited about DeFi governance tokens because they actually have value, and people care about the protocol that they govern.
Yeah, it's a natural sort of evolution, like you're sort of talking about, where in 2017, it's just exuberance, it's excitement, essentially based upon a promise, and no one necessarily cares or wants to care at that point because everybody's making money because the ICOs are being pumped and pumped and pumped. So no one really cares until the ultimate crash. And then, where you're at right now, I think is sort of phase 2 or 2.0, where there's actually a legit team behind it that has more careful thought. And there's more product, actual technology behind it. And they're actually going after a semi-verified use case or product market fit. I think for me, DeFi, the big question is obviously some of the things that are being pumped right now, in terms of Band and Kava, it's not validated. I guess at the end of the day, valuation is just what individuals agree on or what a market agrees on. So I guess it is worth that at the moment. But for me, it doesn't merit that in a variety of ways, but it is going after, sort of a use case that I think ultimately has the ability to be quite disruptive. I'm just not sure if we just haven't seen it verified in practice just yet, whether or not the technological capabilities are up to snuff currently to actually be able to make this a verified scalable solution. But it's super, super early just in digital assets in and of itself. You figure Bitcoin is only 10 years or 11 years old. So some of these projects are in very, very early stages. So I'm bullish in theory, super on DeFi. I just think in practice, there's still going to be some bumps ahead that are going to need to get smoothed through.
Yeah, and a lot of the excitement about DeFi is with liquidity mining, which is essentially like an airdrop for using these protocols. So it's better than like the old airdrop where you just got the tokens for free, or you had to like shill the project on social media and then you got like a bounty reward. So this time you're getting these tokens for providing liquidity on a decentralized exchange, or using a lending marketplace. So they are still kind of airdrops in a sense, but it's it's driving usage of the platform. You can fairly criticize that as kind of artificial, but you are seeing like huge growth on some of these protocols and platforms, and liquidity mining is driving a lot of that. So it's interesting. Incentives are always like a big thing in cryptocurrency. So it's been a really interesting thing to watch and participate in to some degree.
Gotcha. So tell me about Origin. So for those who don't know anything about it, obviously, we're not going to go super down in the weeds, just obviously given time constraints. But tell me about Origin, and sort of like its value prop, or the problem that it's trying to solve, is, however you feel suited.
Sure. So Origin is providing a platform for peer-to-peer commerce. The original use case that we talked about a lot was Airbnb. So people talk about Airbnb like it's a peer-to-peer platform, like, oh, it's home sharing. Like I'm sharing my home with a tourist or someone visiting, and it's a peer-to-peer interaction. But in reality, that's not true. Airbnb is a giant corporation that sits in the middle of the transaction. They take a 20% or whatever cut. They can deplatform you or like kick you off the platform for any reason. You don't really have any recourse or say in that. So our idea, and this was something that a lot of other smart people talked about, was, what if we could create a truly peer-to-peer network where people could share their homes or share their cars, or just provide any goods and services without this middleman kind of like rent seeking, taking a cut just for providing the platform.
Got you.
So yeah.
No, go. So, like I always or talked about in prior podcasts, there's always like this general theory of how it's going to be, or the problem that you're actually going to solve, and then it sort of morphs once you actually like get into the meat of it and start taking kind of contact with the enemy, so to speak. So has there been an evolution process for Origin once you guys have started building out? And then again, I guess from your perspective, gone out there and actually tried to, attract users here to essentially verify that this is something that can be done well, decentralized, not just well, but also well enough to be able to incentivize, institutions, individuals that are on these particular platforms to start to maybe take a little bit of their business over to open source protocols like Origin.
Yeah. So decentralized applications are hard to use. MetaMask is hard to use. There's a pretty high learning curve when you're talking about mainstream users and using a blockchain-based application. So although our initial vision was to disrupt something like an Airbnb or a Craigslist, we did choose to target more use cases that were more crypto friendly, or things that would appeal more to the cryptocurrency community. So we have two flagship products right now. One is the Origin Marketplace. You just go to shoporigin.com to see it on desktop. It's just a peer-to-peer marketplace where anyone can create a listing for any good or service, essentially. Like you can put your home up for rent there. You can say you're a freelance photographer and put up your services. You can sell your used snowboard or whatever you want to do. And it's a marketplace for peer-to-peer transactions. And our second flagship product is more of like a merchant it's more of like a merchant experience. Like we call it DShop, which was short for decentralized Shopify. Like it's an alternative to Shopify. We heard so many complaints from people who were operating their stores on Shopify that they charged like censorship resistant version of Shopify, where people can create their own storefronts. They don't have to pay us middleman fees, and we can't take them down.
Got you. So that's not that big of a sort of a transition. So that has been proving a little bit more resilient. I can't remember if you mentioned it or not, but you're talking about how decentralized anything or experiences are typically quite onerous from the user perspective. Has there been any particular ways to try to smooth that over, or are you guys still at the stage where you're focused squarely on the early stage investors, or not investors, but early stage adopters, and that doesn't necessarily matter to them so much? You just want to be able to prove out the value prop to the early stage guys, and then eventually figure out the user experience whenever you start crossing the chasm a little bit more.
So we've implemented something called meta transactions. It's just essentially sponsored gas, where we sponsor the gas costs on behalf of users, so they don't have to like pay, you know, these days it would be a lot, but back when we were developing it, like a few cents in gas, just to submit their listing or make an offer on someone's product. So we do have meta transactions, so we can sponsor those gas fees for people. That's a pretty big user experience improvement. You know, we've released a mobile app, so for Android or iPhone, that feels pretty similar to a traditional mobile app, and I think that takes you more into a traditional experience than trying to use MetaMask on Chrome or something like that. But we have very talented product people, designers, engineers, and we're trying to replicate the experience of a traditional centralized application and keep things decentralized. But there's always trade-offs, and there's, you know, it's always going to be a little bit more difficult to, you know, manage your own keys, manage your cryptocurrency wallet than it is to have a traditional like email-based account where everything's hosted for you. And
Yeah.
I don't know that there's a, you know, easy solution for that.
Yeah, I mean, it falls back into, you know, sort of what you're mentioning before. It's or sort of what we were talking about before. It's still very, very early stage. So there's always going to be a little bit of a trade-off given we're this early in the game. You mentioned one thing that I just want to touch on before we sort of move on, is sponsoring the gas fees. So you guys are built on Ethereum. Is there any, so how do you guys feel about the transition over to 2.0, and or has there been any sort of talks looking at adjacent chains, adjacent protocols that maybe might be a little bit smoother in terms of scalability, or more straightforward in terms of scalability? Obviously, if that's, you know, proprietary, you can, you know, choose to say that's not your business. But I just thought it was curious enough, just given that the gas fees have been so prevalent given the recent spike in Ethereum price.
Yeah, so we've been waiting for ETH 2.0 for a long time, just like everyone else. We haven't seriously considered any other blockchains. The developer community is just, you know, 99% of smart contract developers are building on Ethereum. Any blockchain, any other smart contract blockchain that wants to compete with Ethereum, they usually heavily market that they're EVM compatible, so you can code in Solidity. Like that says a lot, you know. So we haven't seriously considered other blockchains, even though, you know, we're not. I don't think anyone's happy with the speed and the congestion and the fees going on right now with Ethereum. But I think, you know, we're going to wait for ETH 2.0. Like, it seems like it's finally going to come around the corner. If not this year, then next year. And then we'll probably reevaluate next year.
Got you. It seems like, so one of the more interesting things about digital assets, just to take a side tangent here, is that like in traditional tech startups, having the first mover advantage, like, it's nice, but it's not the end all be all. But it seems like in digital assets or cryptocurrency, given the network effects are so powerful because there's so much incentive alignment, that first mover, like being the first mover, is incredibly difficult to sort of displan, at least in the early stages that we've seen over the past 11 years that digital assets or cryptocurrencies have existed. Do you foresee, or do you think, I guess we're just doing a thought experiment right now, that that'll change anytime soon? Because like you said, Ethereum is the first mover, and for the most part, it's not going as smoothly, or the scalability solutions haven't been implemented as quickly as the developer community would like. but there's really no other game in town at the current moment. I just don't see feasibly how competitors eventually chip away at that without maybe something cataclysmic happening on Ethereum.
Yeah, so I think that speaks to one kind of main dynamic about the cryptocurrency space right now. There's a lot of speculators and a lot of believers and a lot of enthusiasts, but there's not actually that many end users or people who are using these blockchains or using decentralized applications to get something done. So it would be like, if Uber came first and every user of Uber owned like Uber stock, they're probably not going to switch to Lyft because they already own Uber stock. They have a vested interest in seeing Uber succeed. So I think that's one of the dynamics that explains, why community and like, why community is so important for cryptocurrency projects and different blockchains. You see the passion and like the online arguments, the memes that come out of these arguments. It's just like this whole culture. I think that's founded on the fact that anyone can be a stakeholder in that network. So you see behaviors that are similar to like multi-level marketing or Ponzi type behavior, because people think that if the thing that they bet on succeeds, it's going to make them rich, and so they want to convince everyone else to bet on that too. I think there will be a change though when blockchains and cryptocurrencies are mature enough that they can support like real mainstream applications where people don't, they're just useful applications that happen to be running on blockchain. Like the people who are using them don't own ETH or EOS or whatever. They're just using the application because it's useful. Once that kind of user becomes more numerous than the speculator, then you'll start to see like, if people are building huge apps that are, have a business model and it has nothing to do with the token's price going up, people are going to switch to what works best for their users and what works best for their business model. I think it's really a question of, the maturity of the industry and like why people are interested like right now. I think there will be opportunity for new blockchains and new technologies to come to the forefront, but it's not going to be based off of speculative interest. It's going to be based off of real users using applications built on those blockchains.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, as a speculator, I definitely agree that the long-term viability of this particular space won't be driven by individuals, like myself. It'll be driven by developers, people, the entrepreneurs that are out there actually building something that solves a problem in a 10x better way, but also provides a more user-friendly experience where, exactly just like you said, like the end user has no idea that it's built on Cosmos or built on Ethereum and doesn't necessarily give a shit. It's like the same thing whenever you book something on Airbnb. You don't know like what server they're running it on. It's like, is it on AWS? Or they don't care. They're just they want a service and they're going there because it provides the best service for their needs.
Exactly. Like if someone built a superior version of Airbnb that runs on Tron, and like no one can tell that it runs on Tron, and like it's just a great app that people love to use, like then it's game over. Tron's going to have tens of millions of users, and compared to Ethereum's tens of thousands.
Got you. You mentioned, so throughout that you were talking about the power of community, and you've mentioned it before. Obviously it flows in to sort of your job description as head of business development. I know you're currently based in Asia right now. You're in Thailand, I believe Bangkok. Is that just happenstance, or do you believe that a little bit of or is Asia becoming more and more prevalent in terms of community development? So at the beginning you talked about you're from San Francisco. San Francisco is essentially the cradle, not just of digital assets and cryptocurrency within the US, but also sort of like brain power as well. Do you feel like that's gradually, or the importance of projects and community is gradually shifting more and more to Asia?
I think there was a period of time, maybe 2017, 2018, maybe into 2019, where most of the speculative type activity and most of the venture capital type activity by overall volume or value was based in Asia. So I think most projects were looking east, like how do we build our Chinese community? Like how do we do WeChat? How do we build our Korean community? I think anyone who works in the cryptocurrency industry or has worked in it for a few years knew that South Korea was like a huge market, 2018, 2019. I think the regulatory landscape is responsible for a lot of that. Like it's, a lot of the early ICOs or whatever were started in the US, but, relocated to like Zug in Switzerland or whatever for legal reasons. And then they started, domiciling elsewhere. And then they started locking out US citizens or residents from being able to participate because they were scared of regulatory action. So I think that, and exchanges were doing the same thing. They didn't want, Americans to trade on their exchange because they were afraid of the SEC. So I think that drove a lot of activity east. And I think, there was already a strong base, like most of cryptocurrency mining is done in China. So I think the East has always been interesting, especially coming from San Francisco. Like we've always looked East. There's a very, very vibrant cryptocurrency community in these countries. That was a factor in why I moved to Asia, but it wasn't the only factor. And I think we're kind of seeing with this new DeFi cycle, things are kind of shifting back west a little bit. And I think you're going to start to see China and South Korea and these other Asian markets that were really, really active with ICOs start to pour into DeFi in the coming months. It's been a little bit quiet so far. And I think, DeFi for all its like hype, it's really only like, a few hundred people on Twitter who are really passionate about it and they just have a really loud voice. I don't really think that there's that many people involved right now. And I think you're going to see it like 10x in the next year or two. And a lot of that might come from Asia.
Interesting. So you think that even with all its early stage successes that DeFi's had, there's still just a handful of people, and you think once Asia starts getting involved, that could potentially be the next sort of, pump up?
So I think because of the nature of DeFi liquidity mining and how some of these governance tokens are launched, it takes a lot of technical expertise to get involved. Like if you want Wi-Fi or waifu or however people are pronouncing it these days, if you want those tokens, like you have to use these fairly hard to understand protocols. Like you have to be a liquidity provider on Curve or a different protocol to get these tokens. And it's not as easy as just going on Binance and buying something and getting a bag of this token. So I think there are more barriers to entry. So the community size is much smaller and much more sophisticated. And I think it will probably stay that way. I don't think, it probably won't get as big as ICOs were because it was pretty easy to, at least post-listing, to buy these tokens. Maybe in the early days of ICOs with like gas wars and everything like that, you had to understand, smart contracts to participate. But it became easier and easier. But we are seeing the same thing in DeFi. Like there's all these aggregators and like user experience improvements that are coming. So I think that will drive some, more mainstream crypto users to DeFi. Like, I just think that, the more that I talk about it, I guess that they are pretty similar. Like DeFi is like early 2017 in ICOs. Like that's where we're at right now. Like you have to have some technical expertise to participate, but it's probably going to get easier and easier. So, it's probably going to look like 2018 ICOs in 6 months or something like that.
Yeah, I was talking to Josh Olskowitz. He, he's well known on Twitter and one of the lead analysts for Brave New Coin, one of the lead new traders for them. But he was talking about how it's very, very similar. DeFi is very, very similar in ICO, like to the ICO boom, not just from a fundamental perspective, but also from a technical charts perspective, and saying that the recent boom in Ethereum makes total sense given it's just the ICO boom sort of altogether, where all the ICOs needed to get exposure to Ethereum to be able to launch their ICOs, and kind of a very similar mechanism is kind of playing out, at least anecdotally, within DeFi as well. So it seems from from a few different perspectives, that everyone is kind of expecting that DeFi, at least in its early stages, kind of has the capability to set off that next sort of irrational exuberance boom that we saw in 2017 with ICOs. How long have you been? When did you make the leap over to Asia? How long have you been in Bangkok?
So first I went to China. It was probably middle of last year that I made my move. I went to China first. I tried it out. I tried Thailand out, and I decided, primarily because of Thai boxing, Muay Thai, that I preferred Thailand. So I settled here in Bangkok after trying a few cities out in Thailand.
So you said the magic word. So tell me about your experience in Muay Thai.
So my background is more of a wrestling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background. I wrestled for 2 years in junior college. I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a while. I have like a blue belt or whatever in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I used to compete in it. Then I had a bunch of injuries from wrestling and Jiu-Jitsu, and I kind of took some time off. And when I came back from like a second back surgery, I was like looking for a combat sport that would be a little bit easier on my joints. And I had dabbled in Muay Thai, here and there, because most jiu-jitsu schools or whatever teach everything, like MMA, Muay Thai, boxing. I dabbled in Muay Thai, but I hadn't really committed to it. So, but because of circumstances, I thought, now was the perfect time to, really focus solely on Muay Thai. And I started training maybe a year and a half ago at the school in San Francisco, Wooden Muay Thai. And then, moving to Thailand, like obviously I'm going to train Muay Thai. It's the homeland of Muay Thai. And there's just, things are just so high level here. Like, I'm getting my ass kicked by like 15-year-old Thai kids who are half my size every single day. Like every gym has champions, and it's just, you're going to, like, if you're in Thailand and you're interested in combat sports, you just have to train Muay Thai. It's just a no-brainer. So.
Yeah, it's the Mecca of it, and those 15-year-old kids, they've been fighting since they were 9 years old. So that kid probably has like 100 fights, 90 fights already. So it's an entirely different experience, or it's an entirely different world over there. What gym are you training out of right now?
I'm training out of FA Group in Bangkok.
Okay. I've never heard of those guys, but I'm sure they've got a bunch of champions that they send over to the local stadiums and stuff like that. So you've been involved for about a year, okay, or a year and a half, you said. Okay.
I would say it's about the 2-year mark now, since I got more serious. I had done Muay Thai a long time ago, but I'd never really gone like regularly and like tried to practice like every week or something. I'd say like my real Muay Thai journey began 2 years ago.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, Muay Thai in the U.S. is still very, very nascent, just in general, because we were one of the last countries to actually get it, where real Thai champions actually came over and created a beachhead and started to teach us. But even still to this day, especially with the proliferation of mixed martial arts, I see a lot of Muay Thai out there that's just bullshit at the end of the day. So I can see how, training in the US and then going over to Thailand, it's just an entirely different beast in and of itself. And I would have made that choice 100%. We were looking to maybe spend a month or two in Thailand, but obviously we're Americans and we can't travel anymore. So we'll just have to wait till the world maybe normalizes a little bit.
Yeah, you said it. It's Muay Thai in Thailand and Muay Thai in America. There's some pretty significant differences, and it's something I didn't understand until I came to Thailand and started training. My trainer in San Francisco, he was a Lumpini champion. He was a golden era legend from Thailand. So I did have like an authentic Thai coach, but just because of the MMA culture and like how Muay Thai is scored in America, it's scored more like kickboxing, like, it's punches and kicks, not so much clinching and kneeing. And then the gym that I go to now in Bangkok is the most famous clinch and knee gym in the country. So like the practice is like 50% focused on the Muay Thai clinch and just kneeing and elbowing. So it's just a completely different feel than most Muay Thai practices that I went to in the US.
Yeah, I mean, my gym, so the gym that I started at was very, very clinch heavy. So run by another Thai champ. So it was affiliated with Saxon and then Koban. Luk Chai Thong is, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, but another golden era guy. But yeah, it was very clinch heavy sort of gym. So I typically love that stuff. And that's sort of how, at least with some of our Muay Thai fighters and some of our MMA guys that we train here in Pittsburgh, it's not like, it's not an option. Like, it's obligatory. Like, you have to have some sophistication. You have to know what you're doing in the clinch, and you have to have good knees. So do you find like your style is adapted a little bit like that now? Do you find you're a little bit more of a Muay Thai type style, or like me, I was brought up in that system, so I'm good at it, but that's not my natural temperament. So like, I'm naturally going to fight more like Muay for more, where I'm want to do the chess match. I want to conserve energy and just kind of play that game. But if I end up in the clinch, or I end up in that sort of battle, I'm not going to be happy about it, but I'll be fine as well.
I think it's a mixture for me. I'm a taller guy. I'm 6'3", so like keeping and keeping range is like something that I was naturally drawn to. And because there was not a whole lot of clinching in the training that I did in the US, that was more like, a Muay Femur style. But being tall is actually really, really beneficial for a Muay Thai clinching style too, which is something I didn't know before I started really studying, Thai, Muay Thai. So my style has definitely changed to like a Muay Thai style. Like I definitely would say like knees and clinch are the strongest part of my games now by far. And I think, the wrestling background helped a little bit. Just that, the feel of like moving someone's body around. It did help, but you have to learn everything. Like going for underhooks is beneficial in wrestling, but in Muay Thai, not so much. So you have to learn like new rules, but you do have some feel that carries over. So I would say, yeah, my style before was definitely not a clinch Muay Thai guy, but because of where I train, like, we clinch before pads in my gym. That's how, sacrosanct clinch is in my gym. Like, it's done before everything else in practice. You warm up and then you clinch.
Yeah, I think A, I love that, but B, wrestling and jiu-jitsu is definitely beneficial for the style that you're doing right now, to shorten your learning curve within the clinch 100%. Like you said, it's not apples to apples comparison, but there's a lot of feels, there's a lot of general strength elements, like having a strong neck, and in your case, given you've had multiple back surgeries, but having a strong back, like that's pretty paramount, or I should say a core and a base is paramount to clinch, same exact way that is paramount in wrestling. But then also, whenever you're looking for some of the dumps and trips, you're looking for very similar levers that you would kind of find within jiu-jitsu as well. So the other Muay Thai coach that we have at our local gym, he always compares it to kind of like stand-up grappling. So even for purple belts and above, I believe is what he opens it up to, they're allowed to come over to like our dedicated clinch classes as well. So all that stuff helps you out a lot. And yes, being tall with long knees is amazing. So I'm 6'2", and I absolutely love being able to set up some of those long knees as well. So I agree. I agree with that particular philosophy. It's great. It's the best thing.
Muay Thai is a striking and grappling art. Like that's my opinion now, and I think maybe that's unusual for some listeners who have dabbled in Muay Thai in America. They see it more as like kickboxing with elbows, but in Thailand, it's really like half grappling, half striking. That's how they train it in most gyms in Thailand.
Yeah, it's 100% a grappling art. So I mean, the other way around, the whenever I go with straight wrestlers at wrestling practice or jiu-jitsu guys that want to wrestle, or even whenever we're doing shoot box where it's just sparring with takedowns, again, like I'm difficult to take down because I have that general feel, but also some of those strength systems that are just accompanied from being in Muay Thai and actually practicing Muay Thai clinch a lot more than what is normally done within U.S. schools. So I agree with you 100%, and it's easily transferable. So I'm glad you're getting a chance to really experience that out in Thailand. Before we sign off, have you gotten a chance to go to any of the stadium fights? I know it's been a little bit of a weird time, but before then, have you gotten a chance to get to any of the stadium fights? Have you gone to any of the recent one championship fights that they put on in Bangkok?
I didn't get to go to one, and the fights that they're putting on now are without audience because of
Yeah,
the COVID.
yeah.
I did go to Rajadamnern once before all the COVID stuff started, so I got to see like one of the top level stadiums and all the crazy gamblers, and sit on the concrete steps and get the real authentic Bangkok's Muay Thai stadium experience. That was really cool. But yeah, now there's Muay Thai almost every day right now in Thailand, like live events. It's just, people are wearing masks during the wide crew, during the ritual dance, and there's no audience. So it's a little bit strange. I think it's, they're even changing some of the rules of Muay Thai a little bit. Like they break up clinches a lot faster now. And like one of the stated reasons is because they want to minimize close contact because of COVID, which it's a little bit strange to me since it's a full contact sport. But yeah, I did get a chance to see live Muay Thai. I'm looking forward to being able to see it again. But right now, it's just YouTube, the same that everyone outside of Thailand is getting because that's all there's available due to COVID.
Yeah, there's a famous Western fighter that female fighter that was mentioning was actually worried because her style is very Muay Khao in nature, and she actually had Diesel Noi, one of probably the GOAT of all time in Muay Thai, come up to her gym in Chiang Mai and teach. So that's how high she keeps it in regard. But she was very, very concerned about the new rule set, given everything that's going on with COVID, to see how eventually that could persist even after COVID. Is long since past us as a gradual evolution to work that style potentially out of stadium Muay Thai. So I heard about that. Hopefully, that won't be something that continues to happen. Who's your favorite? Do you have a favorite fighter right now?
Well, I like the guys from my gym, obviously. Yotin FA Group is the top guy from our gym right now. He's the number one ranked guy at 122 pounds in Thailand. He has to take fights against bigger guys all the time because people don't want to fight him at his natural weight class. He's a great guy, great coach. I'm just a fan of him as a person. I get to train with him, so he's probably my favorite. Outside of my gym, so I don't just do a homer pick. I really like some of the fighters in one. Like I like that they're signing all these like Muay Thai legends, and like you're getting to see them fight on like an international stage. Like Pech Morakat, like he just fought Yosin Thai. Like I'm a big fan of Pech Morakat. I think he's a awesome fighter to watch, very technical, lots of clinch, lots of elbows. Maybe a little bit different than what people normally think of as from Muay Thai. Like they think kicks and punches, but he's more of a clinch fighter. So I like him a lot too.
Yeah, I agree. I love watching one. I love the fact that they're doing Muay Thai and 4-ounce gloves because I just like it. I think it makes it more exciting, but also at the same exact time, it takes away a lot of the gamesmanship that you see a lot of these vested schools come from. So like the more Dutch style, they're just using their gloves essentially just as straight shields. Can't do that as much. And same exact thing with the ties. They'll get sloppy with their long guard a lot of the time, especially whenever they're going against Western fighters, and they have to stay 100% on their P's and Q's. So I love the fact that all their Muay Thai events are in their 4-ounce gloves. With that, Nongo is probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite, Muay Thai fighter out there right now. He knows he's not a clinch. He's not a guy that's going to drag you into the clinch and sort of drown you, but his sophistication and again, how he plays that chess match with feints and everything that he does. I really love how he fights. He just puts on a masterclass each time. And also he's one of the guys that I've mentioned before. He's actually better in the 4-ounce gloves. In the regular, Muay Thai gloves, he is a little bit more defensive. He's a little bit more content to play the Thai style rules and just win on points. Whereas in the 4-ounce gloves, he's far more aggressive, and he's actually better in my particular opinion.
Yeah, I think the rules really dictate how people fight. There's a lot of subtleties in scoring stadium Muay Thai in Thailand that maybe Western people. I certainly, when I first went to Raja Damner or started watching like fights in Lumpini or whatever, like I didn't understand why they were giving decisions the way they were. Like I was like, wait, the other guy was pressing forward and like rocking him with punches the whole time, and the other guy was just running away and throwing like an occasional body kick. Why did the other guy get the clear victory? So I think there's a lot of like cultural differences and rules differences, and it takes a while to like learn how Thai stadium Muay Thai is scored. And I think it's probably not the most fan-friendly or entertaining product for like a Western audience. So I really do think one's rules and like their gloves and everything else, it's a better package for like an international audience. And that's actually a trend that's happening in Thailand too. Like, Thai stadium Muay Thai is largely like a gambling driven sport in Thailand. So that influences, how it's scored and like the pace of a fight. But there are other smaller promotions now, like Max Muay Thai or Muay Hardcore, which reward aggression, and they fight in MMA gloves just like one. So I think there's a cultural shift happening right now between like the gambling stadium Muay Thai and like the more one championship style Muay Thai that's becoming popular. So you're seeing like a split in the sport in Thailand right now, and it's going to be interesting to see which becomes more popular or more dominant.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I'm a Westerner, so I think Western style is a little bit more fan friendly, 100%, but also I respect tradition, and I respect how, traditional stadium Muay Thai is scored as well. But that in and of itself is like an entire separate topic that would take an additional sort of 30 minutes to jump into. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you want to mention that's going on with Origin that you want to make sure that you kick out to any of the listeners before we wrap up?
I guess a sneak peek is we are considering launching like our own DeFi product. So we're not going to announce anything specific. But by the time this podcast goes out, you'll probably see a blog post coming from me on the Origin Protocol Medium page about our relationship with DeFi. So that's potentially some pretty big news that listeners may be interested in.
Awesome. We've talked about it at length during this podcast that we think DeFi is the next big thing. So that's super exciting news. And you heard it potentially second here, on the podcast after the blog post gets put out from there. But Coleman, I really appreciate you taking time out of your evening to have a conversation with us and the listeners. We'll definitely have to have you back on, hopefully whenever things renormalize a little bit. And hear about some of the new, potentially the fights you have gone to over there in Thailand. So I appreciate you. It was a great conversation. We look forward to having you back soon.
Yeah, anytime. Just let me know.
All right, sounds great. All right, everyone. Until the next episode, we'll talk to you soon.